Hello, everybody, and welcome to Reuter's Energy Transition Conference. It's fantastic to be with you for what will be an Accenture double act. My name is Andrew Smart. I'm responsible for Accenture's energy business in Europe, as well as a cross-industry task force focused on the energy transition. So fantastically timely to be with you talking about this topic today. It's fascinating, honestly, to think about the last industry conference I actually physically attended. I can't quite believe that it was in February this year. It seems a lifetime ago, to be honest with you. And there we were discussing, in great detail, the sectoral pathways that were going to be required to be developed towards net zero, and the wide range of commitments that were being made by players on the supply side and the demand side of the energy equation towards that goal. And I think it's been fascinating to see how that thinking's been adopted very broadly since that discussion, and huge progress made in many ways despite lockdown towards these objectives. I think, though, it's equally forced us to step back a little bit and think about the wider system view and the wide range of benefits that are actually available, but also need to be considered if we're to take the right pathways going forward. And it's with that in mind that I'm going to ask my colleague here, Vicky, to talk about her thoughts in terms of what does it mean to take that more holistic and system-wide view, and where some of the value, therefore, will start to emerge. So, Vicky, it would be great if you could introduce yourself and maybe give us, your thoughts on those topics.
Thank you, Billy. Hello and welcome, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. My name is Vicky Parker, and I lead our global utilities practice, as well as helping shape our energy transition agenda for our oil and gas clients. 2020, what a year, both personally for me and professionally. At the start of the year, I joined Accenture just before the pandemic, finding myself to both a new company and also, frankly, a new reality. When we look then at what's happened in energy, whichever way you cut it, this year has been a tough year. But it's not all doom and gloom. We also started to see the first green shoots of recovery, and particularly, as Billy said, focused on the energy transition, which as a practitioner is fantastic to see. For the most part, the utility sector has maintained performance we've seen from those businesses that have really been focused on renewables and indeed regulated assets. What's more rewarding, though, I think, in terms of what we've seen, is the consensus that is now there in terms of the need for carbon reduction, with multiple companies and indeed countries reaffirming their commitment to a 2050 net zero goal and adapting their plans and operating models accordingly. We've also seen an increasingly interested and active shareholder base asking for transparency on the reporting and the journeys to net zero. That can only be applauded. And last but not least, there's been enormous change to consumer and business behaviours, really asking for more link back to the energy transition. There's a huge opportunity to realign investments to deliver against those net zero examples. And we're seeing that through real examples, new visions being set. I don't think in my entire career I've seen 6 months when I've seen so many new vision statements put out by companies. Organisations refocusing their entire operating models top to bottom to focus on low carbon. And importantly, capital actually being redirected into new areas and new technologies. A really good example of this is the World Economic Forum System Value Framework approach that Accenture has helped to produce. The framework's been used to help evaluate the outcomes of potential energy solutions, whether that's economic, environmental, social, or technical. All 4 of those dimensions are important. It's not just about cost. It's a massive step forward, and it moves the discussion forward to focus on the broader societal and environmental impact of energy solutions. So if we stand back for this, and Billy, I'd welcome your views on this, if we assume that the value of the energy transition is there, and we now need to move forward to execute, to capture on it, what do you think the key success factors will be?
Vicky, thank you so much. It's a fantastic reprise of what's been a pretty turbulent year, but one that really does now start to position us to face forward for the energy transition. And I think it's been very interesting to reflect on many of the things that have been key themes to setting us up for this change, And, really practically now I'm starting to reflect on what's it really going to take to turn, those themes into reality. And three really important factors come to mind. The first is collaboration, something that we've talked a lot about, and obviously is at the heart of the sectoral view that I mentioned earlier. But, while we talk a lot about collaboration, I think, we really now need to be talking about trust. I think equally, we've talked a lot about innovation. And I think while that remains crucial, we also need to be talking about risk. And finally, I think it's well established now that the energy transition will run alongside the digitization of many of our industries and many of our value chains. And the digital transformation will be a key enabler. But while we talk about digital transformation, I think we also, need to be talking about human ingenuity and data. And so, with those three things in mind, I just want to, maybe bring those to life a little, and why I reflect on them in the way that I do. So, in the first instance, trust. I think it's been incredibly exciting to think about the potential synergies and the changes to the value chains and the value pools that will open up. And great to think about the collaboration and ecosystems we can bring together in order to explore that. That said, though, ultimately, when value pools are moving around and we're no longer sitting across the table on established and formal interfaces and transactional lines that we're used to, I think building trust and understanding, on both sides of the table is crucially important. And many organizations don't necessarily have that deep skill to build those types of relationships and understanding, but equally don't have the governance in place in order to put this at the heart of their strategic, planning process. I think I had the luxury of talking to a number of IOCs about the synergy case between their business models and Amazon. But ultimately, when we think about these things, there are huge synergies, but it's a daunting prospect often, when we have complexity, on both sides of the divide. And so building that trust is, these are full-time jobs, and it's not, and there's definitely fresh skills and understanding that needs to be built and developed and supported, as I say, by the governance that's required. Secondly, when we think about risk, and I put risk again into the context of innovation, which may seem like a counterforce, but actually, when we have major supply and demand changes, and we think about the uncertainty and the volatility that we've seen this year, not just in oil and gas prices, but carbon prices as well. You can imagine, in many ways, we again need to build knowledge and skills and understanding of what is driving these markets. I had the fortune to work with the likes of BP, Shell, BG, and others, during the last major wave of diversification and moves into new energies. And I think that, while we looked at many exciting and new different and business models, actually the quantification at risk and getting organizations and governance and capital allocation processes comfortable with the risks that were involved is a major undertaking. So when we particularly think about organizations on the demand side of the equation, you think about an organization launching an electric vehicle with power associated with it or bundled with it. Equally, just organizations making net zero carbon commitments. In many ways, in so doing, they're entering the power markets, they're entering the carbon markets. And so building the skills, that are required in order to manage that exposure and really understand the markets that they're entering. These are, again, barriers, but skill gaps that need to be filled, if we're going to continue to move at the pace we need to move at to advance the agenda. And the final point that I made, around digital transformation, I think, both points so far include major elements of new skills and capabilities. And I think, the digital transformation, again, brings that specter. There's no doubt that the new technologies and the use of data and AI and many other facets of the digital transformation offer huge value. But it will undoubtedly equally release the power of human ingenuity. But I think, it also raises the specter of the level of technology awareness and understanding that we need in our organizations. And it's a real reminder, recently did a study on human and machine and the importance of bringing the best value out of both components of that, and really believing that the digital transformation was about maximizing human potential. But it really reminded us there is not another workforce waiting at the gates to come into our organizations to help us with this transition. We need to build on the skills that we have, reskill elements of that skill base, and particularly get them comfortable and capable of working with these new technologies and getting the most out of the data in order to release that ingenuity and insight. So, I think in many ways, all three themes really reinforce the importance of the human side of the energy transition, rather than the portfolio and the engineering side. And I think that's probably, if there was one big takeaway, I think it's that.
Thank you, Billy. That's really interesting. I really found that very insightful in terms of what you were saying just then. I just want to take it, build on that a little bit and take it forward in terms of four things, really. How we see the journey to net zero unfolding. 2, what it means for digital. 3, people, which is absolutely the cornerstone of this, and also data. Linking it back to what I was saying before about the need for a broadened system-wide perspective on how to look at the energy transition. What we've seen in the work that we've done with the World Economic Forum, that countries at different stages of transition maturity can adopt different policy solutions, different levers that will maximise economic, environmental and social and technical outcomes. Just to expand on that a little bit for you. So there are 3 stages in terms of the journey to net zero. First and foremost, which is where most countries are, to be fair, at the moment, is building the core elements to lay the foundation of the transition. What do I mean by that? So that means expanding investment into renewables, efficiency, and a real focus on the grid, particularly interconnection. And actually, these never go away. These remain all the way there through the journey to net zero. Second, moving the market forward, what we're calling the transformational elements. That's, for example, where the electricity generation mix hits 20 to 30% annual variable renewables. So what that means in practice is at times more than 50% of the electricity consumed will be generated by variable renewables. We're saying that's the second stage. And this stage is all about power market reform, much more advanced grid capabilities, smart flexibility, storage, demand optimization, and electrification, importantly, of other sectors such as transport and heating. The third and sort of final stage, along with the foundation elements that we talked about, is that final push to net zero to achieve 100% net zero energy. And to do this, you hear an integrated energy system. I'm sure you've probably heard the word integrated many, many times. It is the buzzword in the sector at the moment right now. But what that actually means in practice is that everything is done at scale. Large-scale electrification of buildings, transport and industry, which in turn, of course, require more zero-carbon electricity. It goes beyond that. Hydrogen is required, for example, to solve the hard-to-abate sectors. And importantly, increasing collaboration is required to drive greater levels of efficiency. And what's really interesting is our work with the World Economic Forum has shown that while different markets, and you'll all agree with this, are at different stages of maturity, they'll generally always follow the same path. However, going back to the 4 things I said at the beginning, how do you do that? And digital is without doubt one of the key core linchpins that holds all of this together. For example, automating routine tasks without human intervention, driving mobility solutions, the integration of operations and information across networks to reduce air pollution in cities, and finally, clean technology applications. Standing back from it though, we've talked about technology, we've talked about the journey to net zero, but the people aspect is at the heart of the energy transition. Everyone talks about this being a human energy transition as much as an energy transition. We're talking about doing things in a fundamentally different way than we've ever done before. And actually, personally, I know a large part of the future we're talking about is unknown. And for some, that's quite scary. For me, it's a bit daunting sometimes in terms of developing business plans and working with companies. But actually, when you unpick it, at the heart of it, it's being about being able to adapt quickly to enable innovation, both at a company and a country level. And I just wanted to touch on a good example of that is, I think, energy retail, and particularly what we've seen across Europe, where in the last 5 to 10 years, we've seen a fundamental rewrite of how retail is done. And it's continuing, it's not over, we're still seeing those boundaries being pushed. What I love about that is I've seen companies move from talking about themselves as energy companies to energy technology companies to technology companies. And those boundaries are blurring and continue to do so. And last not least, just back on the data point, that's absolutely critical. Again, that stitches together a lot of what we're talking about. The journey to net zero requires transparency on reporting and progress. We've seen the ask from the investors to understand exactly where companies are, how they're performing, and how they're deploying capital against those net zero targets. That call's only going to get louder and indeed more important. And the only way you can do that is by having data that you can use and be able to trust. It's complex, but I think when you pull it apart, there's ultimately a wealth of opportunity out there. Very happy to take any questions and as we go through the session, but just to hand back over to you, Billy. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Vicky. I think if we to draw a line under it, I think we would say, we're moving to execution, and execution is going to be all about our people and giving them the ability and getting them ready to execute. So thank you so much for your time today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Many thanks.